Let me tell you something about high-pressure gas pipelines. They scream. They do not scream with a voice you can hear with your ears, but if you have been staring at the telemetry data for 14 years like I have, you feel the vibration in your teeth. It is a low-frequency hum, a constant threat of violence contained by 5 inches of steel, and about 3 million lines of code that I wrote while sitting on a bucket in a trailer in West Texas. My name is Frank Vance. On my Human Resources file, it says Senior Systems Architect. In reality, I am the janitor, the mechanic, and the god who keeps the $140,000 an hour revenue stream flowing. I smell like stale coffee and ozone. I do not wear the designer suits the new corporate employees wear. I wear jeans and steel-toed boots, because when a server rack overheats at 3 in the morning, I am not calling a vendor. I am kicking the door open and fixing it myself. I have been here since the dirt was fresh. Thomas Cole, the old man, the founder, God rest his chain-smoking soul, hired me when this company was just a frantic idea and a pile of debt. Thomas was not one of these modern chief executive officers who microdoses mushrooms and talks about synergy. Thomas was a hard man, but he was our leader. He knew the name of every valve on the line and the name of every kid in my family. I remember one night when we first laid the pipe in West Texas. A massive storm rolled in, turning the clay to thick mud. We spent 16 hours in the freezing rain, holding a flashlight between our teeth while tightening the main junction bolts. Afterwards, we sat in the cab of his old truck, eating cold beans from a tin can and writing the first telemetry code in a spiral notebook by the light of the dashboard. That was the kind of man Thomas was. By the way, if you are into stories about corporate empires burning to the ground because of hubris, do me a solid, hit that subscribe button and drop a like. It helps the algorithm find more trash fires like this one. Just takes a second, unlike the 14 years I wasted here. Thanks. Anyway, back to the grime. Thomas treated me like the son he never had, mostly because his actual son, Julian, was too busy crashing Ferraris in the Hamptons to learn the difference between a pressure regulator and a prostate exam. Thomas and I built the heart. That is what we called the central control system. It was not pretty. It was a Frankenstein monster of legacy code, patches, and digital duct tape, but it worked. It sang. It printed money. When Thomas died last year, the funeral was a spectacle. Black executive vehicles, weeping mistresses, the works. I stood in the back wearing my good blazer, feeling like the ground had opened up. I knew the wolves were coming. I just did not expect the lead wolf to be wearing a suit that's cost more than my truck, and a smile that looked like it was bought at a discount venue shop in Miami. Julian took the throne 2 days later. The transition was about as subtle as a brick through a window. The first thing Julian did was remodel the executive floor. He tore out the mahogany and put in glass. Everything had to be transparent. That is corporate speak for wanting to watch you squirm. He brought in a team of consultants, kids who looked like they were born inside a fleece vest to optimize workflows. I sat in my corner office, which was actually just a glorified closet next to the server farm, and watched the rot set in. It was not the fast kind of rot. It was the slow, creeping kind. The kind that starts with a missed meeting invite and ends with a knife in your back. Frank, Julian said to me during his first week. He was leaning against my doorframe, holding a green juice that looked like pond scum. This office, it is very dark, very analog. It is next to the cooling units, Julian, I said, not looking up from my monitors. I need to hear the fans, he chuckled, a dry, hollow sound. Right, the fans. You know, we are looking to migrate everything to the cloud by the 3rd quarter. Get away from this heavy metal vibe. Make it sleek. You cannot put the pipeline control logic on the cloud. Julian, I said, finally turning to look at him. The latency alone would cause a pressure buildup in the Oklahoma Junction that would blow a crater the size of a football field. Physics does not care about your cloud strategy. He blinked. His smile twitched. That was the moment. That was the exact second I became the enemy. I saw it in his eyes. He did not see a veteran engineer saving him from a lawsuit. He saw a relic. He saw a stain on his new vision board. He saw legacy technology, and let me tell you, in the corporate world, legacy is just a polite word for dead. I went back to my screens. I watched the numbers ticking on the displays. Pressure stable. Flow rate optimal. The heart was beating steady. But I knew deep down in my gut that the cardiac arrest was coming. And it was not going to be caused by a blocked valve. It was going to be caused by a blocked ego. The disrespect started small. It always does. It is like rust on a fender. First, it is just a bubble in the paint. Then you poke it, and your finger goes right through. They stopped inviting me to the Monday morning ops meetings, the meetings I had run for 8 years. When I asked the new vice president of operations, a guy named Keith Barrett, who thought structured query language was a sequel to a movie, he just shrugged. Julian wants to keep the room focused on the future state, Frank. Did not want to bore you with the visionary stuff. Visionary stuff, I repeated, tasting bile. Keith, if Sector 7 sensors are not calibrated every Tuesday, the future state will be a fireball. We have an application for that now, Keith smiled. They had no application, only a dashboard made by a 25-year-old intern showing colors but not talking to the hardware. I knew this because I checked the logs. I was still fixing things in the background silently, like a ghost haunting the machine. I was scrubbing their errors, patching their leaks, keeping the lights on satin glass rooms, talking about disruption. I should have let it blow up then. I really should have, but the pipeline was my baby. You do not let your baby die just because the babysitter is a sociopath. At least not yet. I kept my head down. I drank my terrible office coffee. I chain-smoked in the parking lot, staring up at the gray sky, wondering how long I could hold the weight of the company on my shoulders. I was the Atlas of this company, and Julian was currently busy trying to chip away at my kneecaps with a golden chisel. It was about 4 months in when I realized they were not just ignoring me, they were erasing me. My name started disappearing from reports. The Cole method of load balancing, which I invented, was renamed dynamic flow optimization. I was becoming a ghost in my own house. But the thing about ghosts is they see everything, and they remember where the bodies are buried, or in my case, where the root keys are hidden. I sat there in the dark, listening to the hum of the servers, and I felt a cold, hard knot form in my chest. It was not sadness anymore, it was clarity. I looked at the terminal window, blinking with a green cursor. Okay, I whispered. You want sleek? You want modern? You want to see what happens when the legacy decides to retire? I took a slow sip of my coffee and went back to work. But I was not fixing bugs anymore, I was documenting them. Every single crack in the foundation. I was building a dossier of doom because if I was going down, I was going to make sure the crash was spectacular. Julian's new regime was deafening. By month 5, the office looked like a technology store had an encounter with a shared workspace. All the cubicle walls were gone, replaced by collaborative tables. I stayed in my cave. They had not taken my office yet. Mostly because nobody else wanted to sit next to the industrial air conditioning units. But the invasion was knocking at my door. Julian brought in a consulting firm called Vertical Leap. They were led by a guy named Hunter Pierce. Hunter was 29, had white teeth, and wore loafers with no socks. Hunter's job was to audit the technology stack. He came into my office holding a tablet. Hey, Frankie, he said. My name is Frank. It is on the door, so we are looking at the repository, and we noticed unstructured data handling in the core kernel. We are thinking of scrapping it for a blockchain solution. I stared at him. I took a slow sip of my coffee, which tasted like mud and spite. Hunter, I said, my voice sounding like gravel in a blender. The unstructured data is the raw telemetry from the pressure valves. It comes in at 6 terabytes a second. If you put that on a blockchain, the transaction time will be longer than the heat death of the universe. The pipe will burst before the first block is verified. Hunter blinked. He tapped his tablet. Right. Well, Julian feels like blockchain is the future. It plays well with the investors. Gines does not have shareholders, Hunter, I said, and do not call me Frankie. He left making a note on his screen. I knew what he wrote. Resistant to change. Hostile, the isolation ramped up. A critical report on system latency went out on a Wednesday. Usually I am the first signature on that. This time I did not even get a blind carbon copy. I found a copy in the recycle bin. Yes, I dig through trash now. That is where the truth is. I saw that my name had been replaced by the words Ops Team. Ops Team was Hunter and a couple of interns. But the real dagger came during the quarterly all-hands meeting. Julian stood on a stage in the cafeteria, microphone headset on like he was giving a technology talk, pacing back and forth. The slides behind him were all stock photos of people shaking hands and rockets taking off. I stood in the back leaning against the wall, arms crossed. "We are shedding our skin," Julian announced, throwing his hands up. "We are moving from an infrastructure company to a technology company. No more old ways, no more dead weight." He clicked the remote. On the before side was a dinosaur. On the after side, a sleek rocket ship. "We have spent millions maintaining legacy systems that were, frankly, embarrassing," Julian said, grinning. He looked right at the back of the room, right at me. Systems that were held together by duct tape and nostalgia. "Well, folks, the nostalgia is over. We are automating the architecture roles. By next quarter, the Artificial Intelligence Oversight Committee will handle all core logic." The room applauded. They were clapping for my funeral. I felt the heat rise up my neck. It was not shame, it was rage. Pure, distilled, 100-proof rage. I had sacrificed my marriage to my first wife because I was married to the pipeline. And this trust fund baby was calling my life's work a dinosaur. I did not storm out. I did not cry. I just smiled, a tight, thin smile. After the meeting, I went to the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face. I looked in the mirror. I looked tired. The fluorescent lights hummed above me, buzzing like an angry hornet. "Okay," I said to my reflection. "You want to automate me? Let us see how your artificial intelligence handles the dead man's switch." I walked back to my office. The hallway was full of chatter. People were drinking the Kool-Aid. I sat down at my desk and pulled up the command line. I did not do anything malicious. I did not plant a virus. I did not delete files. I just checked the authentication protocols for the master control node. The system was designed so that every 60 hours a specific encrypted key had to be entered manually by a senior architect-level user to authorize the pressure variance. It was a safety feature we installed to prevent hacking. If the key was not entered, the system assumed a hostile takeover or a catastrophic failure. It would default to safe mode. Safe mode meant shut down. All valves closed, all pumps stopped. A total lockout until a hard manual reboot, which took 4 days and a team of 30 engineers. I looked at the schedule. The next authorization was due in 40 hours. Usually, I have a script that automatically renews it because I am the one logged in. I opened the script. I looked at the code. If user equal to Frank Vance, renew authorization function. I hovered over the delete key. Not yet. I needed them to pull the trigger and leave their fingerprints on the weapon. I closed the window. 10 minutes later, an email pinged. It was from Human Resources. Subject: mandatory meeting at 3 in the afternoon today. I knew what it was. You do not get a mandatory meeting at 3 in the afternoon on a Friday unless you are getting walked out. I walked down the hall, feeling the weight of the 14 years I had given to this company lifting from my shoulders. The Human Resources office smelled like sanitizer and lies. I walked in at 3 in the afternoon sharp. Julian was there, sitting in a chair that looked too small for his ego. Beside him was the new Human Resources director, a woman named Sarah Jenkins, who smiled so hard I thought her face might crack. "Have a seat, Frank," Sarah said, gesturing to a generic gray chair. I sat. I did not cross my legs. I sat square, hands on my knees like I was bracing for impact. "So," Julian started, clasping his hands. He would not meet my eyes. He was looking at a spot on the wall just above my left ear. "We have been doing some restructuring as per the announcement today. You are firing me," I said flatly. With no question in my voice, Julian flinched. He hated confrontation. That is why he hired consultants to do his thinking for him. "We are transitioning your role. The systems you manage are being sunsetted. We need a fresh perspective for the cloud migration. You are firing the only person who knows how the encryption handshake works on the Tulsa main line," I said. "We have excellent documentation," Sarah chimed in, sliding a thick envelope across the desk, "and we are prepared to offer a very generous severance package. 8 months pay, full benefits for 18 months in exchange for a standard non-disclosure agreement and a non-disparagement agreement." I looked at the envelope. Then I looked at Julian. "You really think documentation is enough?" I asked quietly. "Julian, your dad did not write manuals. He wrote code on napkins. The documentation you have is 7 years out of date. The system runs on patches I wrote 2 days ago. We have Hunter," Julian said, his voice hardening, "and we have the new artificial intelligence oversight. We will be fine, Frank. Frankly, your negativity has been a drag on the culture." There it was. My competence was negativity. My warnings were drags on the culture. I reached for the pen. You want me to sign this? I asked. Yes, Sarah said, and we will need your badge and laptop immediately. Security will escort you out. I signed the document. Julian looked surprised. He expected a fight. He expected me to scream, to beg, to throw a chair. He wanted the drama so he could justify the decision, but I gave him nothing. Just ink on paper. Is that it? Julian asked, almost disappointed. That is it, I said. I stood up. I just need to grab my personal things from my office and log out. Security will accompany you, Sarah said. 3 large guards in uniforms were waiting outside the door. They followed me down the hall. I walked past the open workspaces. People stopped talking as I passed. They knew the dead man walking parade. I kept my head high, staring straight ahead. We got to my office. Do not touch the computer, one of the guards said. Just personal items. I have to log out, I said calmly. Unless you want my user profile active on the network. That is a major security violation. The guard hesitated. They did not know the protocol. They were hired muscle, not information technology experts. Fine, the first one said. Make it quick. I sat down. My screen was still active. The command line was blinking. I did not delete anything. I did not deploy a virus. I simply typed one command. Log out user hard revoke all active tokens. This command does exactly what it says. It logs me out. But because I was the root architect, my session acted as the heartbeat for the system's active security clearance. As long as I was logged in, even in the background, the system knew the creator was home. By revoking all tokens, I was telling the system the creator had left the building. The system was programmed to wait exactly 15 minutes for a re-logging from a root user. If no root user logged in, it initiated the lockdown protocol. I hit enter. The screen went black. Then the login prompt appeared. I stood up. I grabbed my bag. I took my framed photo of Thomas Cole off the desk. All done, I said, Bodge. The guard demanded. I unclipped it from my belt. I dropped it into his palm. Good luck, boys, I said. You are going to need it. I walked out of that office for the last time. It was 3:15 in the afternoon. The timer was running. Tick-tock. I walked through the lobby, past the polished glass, past the reception desk with the $7,000 flower arrangement. Julian stood there chatting with Hunter, laughing about how easy it was to get rid of the dinosaur. Julian saw me. He raised his coffee cup in a mock toast. Enjoy retirement, Frank, he called out. I stopped. I turned. The guards were right behind me. My father's company isn't your vacation spot, sweetheart. Julian sneered, emboldened by his audience. Pack up, I smiled. A real smile this time. It was the smile of a demolition expert watching the fuse burn down to the last inch. The pipeline shuts down in 15 minutes, I said. My voice was calm, carrying across the quiet lobby. Good luck. Julian laughed. Hunter laughed. The receptionist giggled. Dramatic to the end, Julian shook his head. Get him out of here. I walked through the revolving doors and into the humid afternoon. The air smelled like exhaust and rain. It smelled like freedom. I walked to my beat-up Ford truck. I got in. I did not start the engine. I checked my watch. 3:18, 12 minutes left. I reached into the glove box and pulled out a fresh pack of cigarettes. I lit one, cracked the window, and leaned back. I was not going anywhere. I wanted to watch the lights go out. Sitting in my truck, the vibration of the engine was gone, but the hum in my head was still there. I pulled out my phone. I had one last little message to send. I opened my personal email application. I had a draft saved. It was addressed to the entire board of directors, with Julian and his executives carbon-copied subject. For reference only, System Dependency Matrix. Attached was a single document. It was not a rant. It was a simple, color-coded chart showing the hierarchy of the company's control systems. At the top was the cloud. Below that, the application programming interface layer. Below that, the server clusters. And below that, supporting the entire pyramid like the world-bearing turtle, was a single red box labeled Root Architect Session, Frank Vance. I hit send, 3:23 in the afternoon. 7 minutes remaining. Inside the glass tower, I imagined the scene. Julian was probably popping champagne. Hunter was probably explaining to an intern how they were going to leverage the synergy of the new paradigm. I knew the rhythm of the pipeline better than my own heartbeat. Right now, the pumps in Sector 9 were pushing 50,000 pounds per square inch of natural gas toward the distribution hub. The sensors were pinging the server every 150 milliseconds, asking, "Are we safe?" Is the operator authorized? For the last 13 minutes, the server had been replying, "Session terminated, waiting for reauthorization." At 15 minutes, the answer changes to, "Unsafe, initiating containment." 3:25 in the afternoon. I took a long drag of my cigarette and blew the smoke toward the building. "Boom," I whispered. It was not an explosion. That is for the movies. Real catastrophes are silent at first. Inside the building, the first thing that happened was the lights. The office lighting was tied to the grid management system to save power. When the containment protocol hits, it prioritizes the emergency circuits. I saw the lobby lights flicker. Then they went out. The emergency red floodlights kicked on. I chuckled. Step 1, atmosphere. Then I saw movement. The security guards at the front desk grabbed their radios. People started walking toward the glass windows, looking confused. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Toby, one of the junior engineers. He was a good kid, kept his head down. "Toby, did you do something?" All the screens just turned red. I did not reply. Inside the operations center, the war room as Julian called it, the mood must have shifted from celebration to confusion instantly. The massive wall of monitors flashed a single message: "Critical error, authentication timeout, system lockdown initiated." And then the sound of money dying. The pipeline did not just stop, it slammed shut. Valves the size of large vehicles slammed closed across 3 states. The pumps, sensing the blockage, cut power to avoid blowing gaskets. The sudden silence in the control room would be deafening. No hum, no fan noise, just the beep of the alarm. Julian was probably shouting at Hunter. "What is that?" "Turn it off." Hunter would be tapping frantically on his tablet, realizing that his blockchain solution did not have a button for making the panic stop. I watched from the parking lot. I saw Julian run into the lobby, his tie loose. He was yelling at the receptionist. He was waving his arms. He looked out the window. He saw my truck. I saw him freeze. I raised my hand, holding my cigarette between 2 fingers, and gave him a little wave. My phone buzzed again. "Toby." "Frank, the pressure readings are 0. The pumps are offline. Finance is freaking out. They say we are losing $2,300 a minute." I whispered to myself. Tell them to check the math. It is actually $2,333 repeating. I leaned back. The show was just starting. The thing about a pipeline is that it is not just a tube, it is a cash register. When it is running, money pours in. When it stops, money does not just stop coming in, it starts catching fire. Penalties for non-delivery, agreement breaches, emergency shutdown fines from the Environmental Protection Agency. It had been 15 minutes since the shutdown. That was roughly $35,000 in revenue gone, plus probably another $70,000 in penalties racking up. My phone was vibrating so hard it was dancing across the dashboard. Calls from the company mainline, calls from Julian's mobile number, calls from Sarah Jenkins in Human Resources. I let it dance. I was not on the clock, I was unemployed, and unemployed people do not take work calls. I cracked my window down a bit more. I could hear the faint sound of sirens in the distance, likely the fire department automatically dispatched by the safety alarms. I turned the key in the ignition, put the truck in gear, and slowly drove out of the parking lot, leaving them to their red lights and their panic. I drove home, grabbed a burger, and ate it in my kitchen while listening to the rain hit the window glass. My phone was blowing up with dozens of missed calls, but I ignored them. I had called my lawyer, Douglas Albright, 4 weeks ago when the restructuring first began. He was a seasoned shark, and we were prepared for this exact scenario. We sat at my dining room table, reviewing the situation. He ate a slice of pizza and smiled. "This is a bloodbath, Frank," he said. "They have no legal leg to stand on, and they are bleeding cash by the second." Douglas laughed, a loud, booming sound that filled my quiet kitchen. "Frank, you are absolutely ruthless," he said, shaking his head. "But they deserve every single bit of it. They wanted a modern corporation without the modern competence. Now they have to pay for the foundation." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the glass of red wine. It was not about the money, though $70,000 a day was a nice bonus. It was about the principle. It was about showing this new breed of executives that you cannot build a castle in the air without respect for the people who laid the bricks in the mud. Julian thought he was a king, but he forgot that the crown does not hold the walls together. Douglas began typing on his laptop, his fingers flying across the keys with professional glee. "I will have this drafted and sent to their legal counsel in 20 minutes," he said. "They will squirm, they will complain, but they will sign it. They do not have any other card to play." At the office, the board of directors convened an emergency remote call. The chairman, Old Man Cunningham, who was 85, was absolutely furious. Toby was texting me the play-by-play from inside the room. Cunningham saw my dependency matrix chart and demanded to know why my name was on every root node of the system architecture. Evelyn, the chief financial officer, informed the board that the valve's custom firmware was written by me in 2012 and could not be bypassed without risking a massive pressure explosion that would destroy the physical infrastructure. They had no choice but to contact the architect. My doorbell rang. It was Sarah Jenkins from Human Resources with a local police officer. She was pale and accused me of computer sabotage and theft of intellectual property. I corrected her calmly. I had followed Section 5.2 of the Employee Handbook by securing my workstation upon my termination. I did not take anything physical. The officer agreed it was a civil matter, telling Sarah that he would not drag a man out of his house for a corporate computer dispute, and they left. By 7 in the evening, the voicemails from Julian changed from anger to pure desperation. He apologized, invoked his father's legacy, and offered me a promotion to Vice President of Technology. I sat with Douglas and finalized our terms. Since the company was losing $140,000 an hour, we set my consulting rate at $70,000 a day, with full indemnity and a clean record. Most importantly, I demanded Julian's immediate, public, and irrevocable resignation. At 9:30 in the evening, Cunningham called. He complained about the $70,000 a day fee, calling it extortion. I told him it was supply and demand. He hesitated at the clause removing Julian, but I reminded him that Thomas would have fired Julian 8 hours ago for this level of incompetence. Cunningham sighed and told me to come in with my lawyer. We drove to the office. The building was dark, except for the pulsing red emergency lights. In conference room A, Julian was furious, but Cunningham was cold. Cunningham told Julian he was a liability, pointing out that the outage had already cost $3.6 million, with another $15 million in potential delivery penalties. Cunningham gave him a choice: sign the resignation or be removed for cause and lose all stock options and his severance package. Julian signed, threw the pen down, and left the room. Cunningham turned to me and confirmed the wire transfer had been initiated. I walked to the server room, swiped in, and sat at the terminal. I plugged in my hardware key, a small USB drive shaped like a miniature vintage truck. The prompt asked for my passphrase. I typed in the secret phrase Thomas and I had shared. The pipe dreams at night. Green text cascaded down the screen. The system initiated the startup sequence. A deep mechanical thunk echoed as the main hydraulic actuators engaged. The cooling fans began to roar, and the red status lights turned to solid green. I walked into the operations center. The giant wall of monitors flickered back to life. Toby shouted that the flow was restored at 2,000 pounds per square inch. The team cheered. Cunningham gave me a respectful nod. I did not cheer. I just told the room to brew a fresh pot of strong coffee, as I would be billing for the next 12 hours. From the window, I saw Julian standing in the parking lot in the rain, holding a box of his personal effects. The lights of the executive floor buzzed back on, illuminating the tower against the night sky. Julian stood in the shadow of the empire he had failed to run. I took a sip of my coffee, smiled, and went back to work. The pipeline was not going to balance itself.